There is something strange about the way we judge people who don't spend much money. You see someone standing in a supermarket comparing two nearly identical products. He picks up one, checks the price, puts it back, picks up the cheaper one, and you might think, he is just broke, maybe. But what if something else is happening? What if he isn't becoming financially disciplined because he read a book about money? What if life simply gave him no choice? Because there are two people who can earn exactly the same salary, live in almost identical apartments, work in the same city, and even have roughly the same responsibilities. Yet 5 years from now, one can have dramatically more control over his life than the other. And the difference may not be intelligence. It may not be investing. It may not even be ambition. It may begin with something much less glamorous. The amount of their life they have learned to live without. Part 1. The two lives that look the same. Imagine two people walking out of the same office on the same Friday afternoon. Let's call one Cairo and the other Marlo. They are not best friends. They don't even know each other particularly well. But on paper, their lives look almost identical. Same company, similar positions, same monthly salary. They live in the same part of the city. Their apartments are similar. They commute roughly the same distance. Neither comes from extraordinary wealth. Neither has a trust fund waiting for them. Neither knows a secret investment strategy. And if you looked at their lives for one afternoon, you probably couldn't tell who would be better off 5 years from now. On payday, both receive the same amount of money. And then something very small happens. Caro's money immediately acquires a list of things it must maintain: rent, transportation, food, subscriptions, restaurants, clothes, phone upgrades, weekend plans, small conveniences, a lifestyle. None of these expenses are outrageous. That's what makes the story interesting. Caro isn't reckless. He isn't buying sports cars. He isn't throwing money away in casinos. He's simply living what feels like a normal life. And that word matters. Normal. Because one of the most expensive things you can buy is a lifestyle that you eventually become afraid to lose. Part 2. The person who keeps saying, "Not yet." Marlo's life looks different. Not dramatically different. Just slightly less expensive. His phone isn't the newest one. His apartment isn't the nicest one he could qualify for. He doesn't automatically join every weekend plan. When something breaks, his first thought isn't always, "What should I replace it with?" Sometimes it's, "Can I fix this?" And occasionally, when his friends ask him to spend money he doesn't have room for, he says something that sounds incredibly ordinary. Not yet. Not, "I'll never have that," just, "Not yet." That difference matters. Because when you don't have much money, every purchase has a second price. Not the price on the receipt, the price of what that money could have done instead. An expensive dinner isn't just the cost of dinner, it's also the emergency fund you didn't add to. The phone isn't just the price of the phone, it's also the investment you didn't make. The larger apartment isn't just higher rent. It's another monthly obligation you have agreed to carry. And when you have plenty of money, these trade-offs can remain invisible. But when you don't, they become impossible to ignore. Part 3. The lesson you learn when money is tight. This is where forced frugality does something strange to your brain. It teaches you to see money differently. You stop looking at a price and asking only, "Can I buy this?" You start asking, "What happens after I buy this?" That is a completely different question. Because technically, someone earning $3,000 a month might be able to afford a $1,000 phone. The question is whether the person can afford the consequences of owning it. Can they still handle an unexpected expense? Can they still save? Can they still invest? Can they still sleep comfortably if their income disappears for 3 months? This is where two people with identical salaries begin to live in different financial realities. Not because one earns more, because one requires more money to feel normal. And that may be one of the least discussed differences between people who eventually build wealth and people who remain permanently dependent on their next paycheck. Part 4. The cost of looking normal. Cairo doesn't think he is overspending. He thinks he is participating in life. His colleagues order food, he orders food. His friends upgrade their phones, he upgrades his phone. Everyone starts traveling. He starts traveling. Everyone moves into nicer apartments. Eventually, he starts thinking about moving too, and every individual decision makes sense. That's the trap. Lifestyle inflation rarely arrives as one enormous decision. It arrives as a collection of tiny decisions that each feel reasonable. An extra subscription, a slightly nicer apartment, more frequent deliveries, a newer car, more expensive weekends, a few more conveniences. Nothing feels catastrophic until one day you discover something uncomfortable. Your salary has increased, but your freedom hasn't, because your lifestyle increased with it. You're earning more, but you also need more money just to remain the person you have become. Part 5. Marlo's strange advantage. Marlo has a problem Cairo doesn't have. He can't afford to let his lifestyle grow too quickly. At first, this feels like a disadvantage. He watches other people buy things he wants. He postpones purchases. He compares prices. He keeps things longer. Sometimes he feels embarrassed. Sometimes he wonders if he is simply falling behind. But something else is happening underneath all of that. He is building a lower financial baseline. His life does not require every dollar he earns. And that creates something incredibly valuable: a gap. The difference between what he earns and what his life demands. That gap is where wealth begins. Not in the bank account, not in the stock market, not in the luxury apartment. In the gap, because without a gap, there is nothing left to build. Part 6. The 5-year experiment. Now imagine we freeze their salaries. No promotions, no inheritance, no lucky business, no sudden windfall, same salary, for 5 years. And we simply watch what happens. In the first year, almost nothing looks different. Cairo has a good life. Marlo has a good life. Both pay their bills. Both eat. Both enjoy themselves. Both occasionally complain that everything is getting more expensive. From the outside, there is no obvious winner, but underneath the surface, their money is going somewhere different. Cairo's income mostly maintains the present. Marlo's income partly funds the future, and the difference doesn't feel impressive at first. Maybe it's a few $100s a month. Maybe less. That's the part people underestimate. A small monthly difference doesn't look like wealth. It looks insignificant. Until you repeat it, month after month, year after year, 5 years. And suddenly the question changes. It is no longer who saved a little more money. It becomes who spent 5 years purchasing something other than consumption. Part 7. What Marlo is actually buying. Marlo isn't simply saving money. He's buying things that don't look impressive on Instagram. The first thing he buys is breathing room. Then he buys an emergency fund. Then he buys investments. Then he buys the ability to handle an unexpected bill without borrowing. Eventually, something even more important begins to happen. He becomes less dependent on his next salary. That is the part people don't see. Because wealth doesn't always announce itself with expensive objects. Sometimes wealth looks like, I can leave this job. I don't have to take that terrible deal. I can survive if something goes wrong. I can wait. I can say no. That is what money eventually buys. Not just things, options. Part 8. The first big reveal. And this is where our definition of wealth has to change. The person who looks richer today may not actually be richer. They may simply have a more expensive present. The person who appears to be missing out may actually be building a cheaper future, and that's an uncomfortable idea. Because we are trained to measure financial success through visible consumption. The car, the house, the clothes, the restaurant, the holiday, the phone, but none of those tell you how dependent someone is on their next paycheck. 2 people can stand next to each other wearing equally expensive clothes. One might have 6 months of expenses sitting safely in an account. The other might be praying, nothing breaks this month. You can't see that difference. But 5 years later, it can determine almost everything. Part 9. But here's the problem with forced frugality. Now, before you romanticize being broke, there is something we need to understand. Forced frugality is not automatically wealth building. Being unable to afford something does not make you financially intelligent. Sometimes it simply makes life harder. Sometimes you aren't choosing restraint. You're choosing between 2 things you genuinely need. Sometimes there is no surplus. Sometimes your income is simply too low, and we shouldn't pretend otherwise. But there is an important distinction. Survival frugality asks, how do I make it to the end of the month? Strategic frugality asks, how do I use today's limitations to create tomorrow's freedom? The first keeps you alive, the second can move you forward. And the moment you have even a little breathing room, that distinction becomes incredibly important. Part 10. The danger of getting a raise. Here's the irony. Marlo's biggest financial test may not come when he is struggling. It may come when he finally starts earning more. Imagine his salary increases by 30%. For the first time, he can afford the things he used to postpone. A better apartment, a newer phone, more restaurants, more travel, a nicer car, and there is nothing inherently wrong with any of those things. But this is where the 5-year story can split again. If Marlo simply expands his lifestyle until it consumes the new income, he hasn't escaped. He has only created a more expensive version of the same life. The real victory is not earning more. It is allowing your financial margin to grow faster than your lifestyle. That is how the person who started with forced frugality can eventually turn restraint into actual wealth. Part 11. The 5-year difference. 5 years have passed. Cairo's life isn't a disaster. That's important. He still has his job. He still has his apartment. He still enjoys himself. He may even have earned more money over the years. But his financial life is still fragile. Every major disruption threatens the lifestyle he worked so hard to maintain. Marlowe isn't necessarily rich either, but something has changed. He has accumulated enough financial distance from the edge that emergencies don't immediately become disasters. He has assets, savings, skills, maybe investments, maybe a business idea he can finally afford to explore, maybe simply the confidence to leave a job he hates. The difference isn't that one person lived miserably for 5 years. The difference is that one person repeatedly converted part of his income into future choices. Part 12, the question you should actually ask. So perhaps the question isn't, am I spending too much? That's too vague, and it creates guilt. A better question is, how much of my current lifestyle would I have to give up if my income stopped tomorrow? That number tells you something, because the more expensive your life becomes, the more your future self has to earn just to maintain it, and that means your lifestyle can quietly become a cage. You don't need to be rich to feel financially free. You need enough margin that your entire life isn't dependent on the next paycheck. That's why two people with the same salary can have completely different levels of financial freedom. Part 13. If you feel like you're behind, maybe you're the person who still checks prices. Maybe you've had to say no to things your friends could afford. Maybe you're still using something that everyone else replaced years ago. Maybe sometimes you feel embarrassed by it. Don't automatically turn that feeling into shame, because there is something you need to determine. Is your frugality merely evidence that you don't have enough? Or is it helping you create something? Because there is a huge difference. If you are sacrificing everything and accumulating nothing, that's not wealth building. But if your restraint is creating a surplus, and that surplus is becoming savings, then investments, then assets, then options, you may be much further along than your lifestyle suggests. And this brings us back to the two people who started this story. Same salary, same apartment, same city, same 5 years. But they were quietly using their money for two different purposes. One used most of his income to make today comfortable. The other used part of his income to make tomorrow less dependent on income. And that is the difference. Not frugality, not cheapness, not deprivation. Direction, because every dollar you earn is going somewhere. It can disappear into the present, or it can buy you a little piece of the future. And you don't have to become miserable to build wealth. You don't have to reject every pleasure. You don't have to live like you're being punished. You simply have to understand something most people don't think about until much later. Your lifestyle is not just what you can afford today. It is what your future self will be required to keep earning. He picks up the expensive item, looks at it, checks the cheaper alternative, then puts the expensive one back. But this time he doesn't look embarrassed. He looks calm. He looks into the camera. Maybe you're not spending less because you're better with money. Maybe life simply taught you that every dollar has a job. The question is, what are you going to make those dollars do? Same salary, same apartment, 5 years, two completely different lives. And sometimes the person who looks like they're missing out today is the person quietly buying freedom for tomorrow.